بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
Are there any notable rulers of the Ottoman Empire?
Well, there's the ones that everybody notices and pays attention to. So to run through that list, it's Osman Ghazi, the first guy, and there isn't much that we know about him, so it's all grasping at straws. And then you can fast forward to Mehmed the Conqueror, the guy who conquered Constantinople, and he was a very cosmopolitan figure. He was a Renaissance ruler in the sense that he knew Greek, and he knew Arabic, and he knew Turkish and Persian. And he was educated in all these languages and all of these histories and philosophy, theology. He was a very well-educated cosmopolitan ruler. He got the best court education you could possibly have. His father was Murad II. The legacy of his father was restoring the empire before Timur ripped it apart. And Murad II stepped down when Mehmed the Conqueror was only 12 years old. And he basically said, here's the keys to the empire. And he's a 12-year-old kid. So this is well before 1453. This is like 1444. So it's when Mehmet's only 12. And because he's only 12, he's relying on the cabinet to run everything. Well, it doesn't work very well. This goes wrong, that goes wrong. There's a crisis at the frontier. So the cabinet, or the divan, they called Murad II out of retirement. They said, we need you to come back, there's a crisis. So he came back, and he ruled again from 1444 to his death in 1452. Well, when Murad II died, at that point, Mehmed the Conqueror has to come to power, and he does. But this time he's 18 years old, and he's not happy. He's really angry with the divan. So
Because of what they did to him.
What they did to him when he was 12.
I'm sure it was a little embarrassing.
I'm sure it was embarrassing, and he was clearly a strong-willed ruler. There's no doubt about that. So his first goal was, I'm going to take Constantinople, which had been a political goal of Muslim dynasties going all the way back to the 8th century, really.
Because it was a prophecy by the prophet, peace be upon him, that there was going to come a time where a good ruler would finally open Constantinople.
And that hadith might or might not be real, but yeah, there is that hadith floating out there. I don't know if Muhammad really said it, but it's out there, and it is a very well-known hadith, and that hadith was definitely floating around in the 15th century. So Mehmet's like, I'm going to be that guy. So he made it his agenda to conquer Constantinople, and he pulled it off because there's this amazing story. They were blocked off from the Golden Horn by a chain, so they couldn't put ships into the Golden Horn, which is this gulf around the old city of Istanbul. So instead, he put ships on rollers, and they pushed the ships up over a hill, and they came down into the Gulf, the Golden Horn, on rollers, and then floated the boats behind that chain. And that meant that the defenders of old Constantinople had to defend what on that map is the northern side of the city. And they didn't have to defend it as long as that chain was preventing ships from coming in.
That's insane.
It's militarily quite impressive.
He had an inventor create the world's largest cannon at that time, right?
Up to that time, right. There was this, and I think his name was Orban, actually. This individual, who was Hungarian, worked for the Ottomans. He was, in effect, a consultant. And he created the largest cannon ever created up to that point, and they used it in the siege.
And that was a big difference maker, right?
Yeah, it just totally demolished the wall. And the defenders kept having to rebuild it like instantaneously, like, stack while defending it. And they were able to do it. It's you have to give them a lot of credit. It was heroic. There were 7,000 or 8,000 defenders who were mostly what we would today think of as ethnic Greeks, but supplemented by some Italians as well who helped. And there were, against these 7,000 or 8,000 defenders, most of them on that wall, were something like 120,000 Ottoman soldiers, mostly Janissaries, but not entirely. I think this siege went on for 3 or 4 weeks. Yeah, it was a long siege. And if they hadn't have gotten the ships over that hill, they might not have pulled it off. They might have had to give up. And then I don't know that Mehmed would have lasted much longer if that had been the outcome.
Yeah.
But he pulled it off. So what is the first thing he did after he pulled it off? He executed for treason the guys who he didn't like, who had sort of pushed him out of power when he was 12.
Well, they were also trying to undermine his siege of Constantinople while he was out at war. They were saying like, oh, look at this man. He's using our weapons, our men, our resources to go out and fight a battle that at that time they deemed as impossible, right? Like Constantinople was deemed as an impossible city to take over. And so they utilized that to play political games against them, correct?
The way I think of it is that there was, in effect, a peace camp. And the peace camp were the members of the Divan who did not want to attack the Byzantines. They wanted to maintain the stability that they had long had with the Byzantines. And that goes back, at that point, several decades and several generations, because the Byzantines had shrunk so that they were only in control of Constantinople. They were a city-state by that point. And the Ottomans completely surrounded them, and several of the members of the Divan were very tight with the Byzantines, like politically and even personally tight with them. So they didn't see them as enemies, and they didn't see any reason to conquer this town. They just wanted to maintain the status quo well into the future.
What other significant Ottoman Empire figures are there?
So after Mehmed the Conqueror, the next big one is Selim the Grim, and his big contribution was conquering Egypt and Syria, so ending the Mamluk Empire. The next one after that that's really important is Suleiman the Magnificent, for every reason. He's usually the only one you read about in a Western Civ text.
Why is he named Suleiman the Magnificent? That's quite a name.
Well, that's a story too. He's known as Suleiman the Magnificent in Europe, but he's known as Kanuni Suleiman in the Islamic world. And Kanuni means the guy who gave us Kanun, and Kanun is law, right? It's secular dynastic law, not Sharia. So back to why he's known as the Magnificent in Europe. He's known as the Magnificent in Europe because he was by far the biggest show in town throughout Europe in the mid-16th century. There's no doubt about it. Nobody compares to him.
What do you mean by show in town? Like he used to come in with his posse and have a whole bunch of gold and stuff with him, or what?
Well, among other things, he had this famous crown, which has disappeared. Maybe it'll surface someday. But this crown was meant to rival the papal crown. And it literally was full of diamonds and all kinds of finery. So you may have noticed when Queen Elizabeth died, there was some criticism about the actual crown, like this jewel came from here and this jewel came from there and things like that. Well, that crown that Queen Elizabeth had was nothing compared to that. And there it is. You found it, which I think looks kind of funny. But that crown was said to be the most valuable crown ever seen up to that time, and it's lost. Nobody really knows where it went, but if you find that, you're incredibly wealthy if you can find that at some garage sale or something.
That's a good adventure movie plot right there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So after Suleiman, there's some others that matter. There's Mehmed IV, who tried to revive the charismatic sultan and had a campaign against Iran and had an anti-smoking campaign. If you were caught smoking, there was a period under Mehmed IV where you could be executed for smoking, which I think is great. Or not great, hilarious. And then after him, the next big one is probably Selim III, who is the first one who tried to do modernizing reforms at the end of the 18th century. So he's at the same time as Napoleon, and Selim III is trying to break the classical structures and bring the Ottomans, or make it so that the Ottomans can catch up to the Europeans who by that time were ahead of them. And then after Selim III, the big one is probably Abdulhamid II, who ruled at the very end, or towards the very end. He was in power from 1876 to 1908.
Is there anything interesting about him, or he's just...
Oh, there's plenty of things interesting about him. Yeah, he's blamed in a negative sense for setting up the groundwork for what became the Armenian genocide, and that includes a lot of killings in the 1890s, which was while he was in power. On the more positive side, you could say that he was also a modernizing sultan, but using Islamic politics to promote his vision of Ottoman sovereignty. So he's in a way seen by Erdogan, today's Turkish president, as a good model for how Erdogan wants to be president of Turkey.